Hi everybody, and welcome back to week 3 of Working on Cindy. Let's go back over what we know so far. We've already done verse 1, then the chorus, verse 2, then the chorus. Well, as everybody already knows, we're going to be especially working on verse number 3 today. I think we're going to actually extend this and do one more week next week, add on a special ending, and then do all of it. But let's see what we know so far. Remember some of our words? I wish I was an apple, a-hanging on a tree, and every time my Cindy passed, she'd take a bite of me. She told me that she loved me. She called me sugar, remember the word? Plum. She throwed her arms around me. I thought my time had come. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. I'll marry you sometime. Okay, let's go on to verse 2. She took me to the parlor. She cooled me with her fan. She said I was the prettiest thing, the shape of mortal man. My Cindy in the springtime. Who knows what comes next, right? What season of the year? My Cindy in the fall. If I can't have my Cindy, I'll have no gal at all. And then we repeat the chorus. Remember, that's the part that keeps coming back over and over again. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Remember 3 times on that. I'll marry you sometime. So let's sing that much so far. Remember, it starts out with I wish I was an apple. Let me turn my keyboard up just a little bit. It's not quite loud enough, I don't think. Let's try it again. I had an apple. You know what? Mrs. Lentz made a mistake. Should we try it one more time just for me? See, I make mistakes too. I wish I was an apple. Let's try it one more time. I wish I was an apple, a-hanging on a tree, and every time my Cindy passed, she'd take a bite of me. She told me that she loved me. She called me sugar plum. She throwed her arms around me. I thought my time had come. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. I'll marry you sometime. Verse 2. She took me to the parlor. She cooled me with her fan. She said I was the prettiest thing, the shape of mortal man. My Cindy in the springtime, my Cindy in the fall. If I can't have my Cindy, I'll have no gal at all. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy. I'll marry you sometime. Good. And if you feel like you need to do that part over again, because I know that it's not very easy remembering all those words, 'cause it's a lot of words. But if you feel like that you want to go back over and learn that part better, you can pause right here and go back and just go over that part again before we go on if you'd like. Okay, moving on to verse 3 for this week. So, repeat after me. Oh, I love this part. This is fun. If I were made of sugar. Ooh, I like that. I like sugar. I think you can remember that too. If I were made of sugar and standing in the town, then every time my Cindy passed, I'd shake some sugar down. Say that with me. If I were made of sugar, your turn. If I were made of sugar and standing in the town, then every time my Cindy passed, your turn. Then every time my Cindy passed, I'd shake some sugar down. Show me your action. I'd shake some sugar down. Let's do that much all together. If I were made of sugar and standing in Remember, here's this, the sugar part. If I were made of, what is it? Yep, sugar, and standing in the town, then every time my Cindy passed, I'd shake some sugar down. Okay, sing it with me one more time. If I were made of sugar and standing in the town, then every time my Cindy passed, I'd shake some sugar down. Did you get it? I hope so. If not, you can go back and do that part again. Okay, let's go on to the next part of verse 3. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew. You know, when somebody makes clothes, somebody has to sew them together. That's the part where the thread joins with different parts of the fabric, and you can make clothes by sewing the thread together. Well, back in the olden days, they did a lot of it by hand. Have you ever seen a needle? And you can sew things with it. It has a thread that you put through it. Okay, so that's what they're talking about here. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, say it with me. And if I had a needle, your turn. And if I had a needle, my turn. As fine as I could sew, your turn. As fine as I could sew. I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Repeat that part just a little bit at a time. I'd sew her to my coattail. Well, let's make it plural. I'd sew her to my coattails. Say that with me. I'd sew her to my coattails. Good, my turn. And down the road I'd go. Your turn. And down the road I'd go. What are coattails? Well, have you ever seen a really fancy suit, a tuxedo like maybe a conductor wears when they conduct an orchestra? Or maybe you've seen somebody's shirt that's not tucked in, it's sticking out the back, and it kind of looks like it has a tail on the back of it because it's not tucked in. Well, tuxedos have big coattails hanging down in the back. It's a real big fancy suit that a lot of guys wear when they're dressed up for a wedding or to go to someplace really fancy, or a conductor wears. So what this is talking about is the person is saying, I want to be with Cindy all the time. I want to be with her so much that if I sewed her to my coat, to the back of my coat, then she'd always be with me wherever I went. She'd always be with me. Now, this is kind of a silly song, right? Because can you really sew someone to something? No, you can't do that. But it's just the idea that he wants to be with her all the time. And that's a way that to get her in his mind with him all of the time, right? If he could sew her to his coattails or his jacket, then she'd always be around with him, and he would love that. Okay, so let's do the second part of this. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, your turn. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, my turn. I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go, your turn. I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Let's sing just that part. And if I had a needle, go. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Let's do that part one more time. And if I had a needle, because we need the extra practice on the words. Ready? Go. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Okay, and that right there at that part, that's where we add the chorus again. But let's do all of verse 3 now that we've just learned. So here's the entire verse 3 I'm going to go ahead and say all of verse 3. I want you to turn your great listening ears on and listen to me say it. Say it with me in your head if you can think of some of the words. And then we're going to do it all together. So let's say just the words. My turn first. If I were made of sugar and standing in the town, then every time my Cindy passed, I'd shake some sugar down. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Okay, now it's your turn to say it with me. If I were made of sugar. Ready? Go. If I were made of sugar and standing in the town, then every time my Cindy passed, I'd shake some sugar down. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Good, let's sing it all together now, that whole third verse. So we're going to do the whole third verse, and then we're going to put the chorus on the end of it, okay? Because we already know that part. Here we go. If I were made of sugar. Go. If I were made of sugar and standing in the town, then every time a Cindy passed, I shake some sugar down. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, I'll marry you sometime. Okay, so next week we are going to work on the special ending. There actually is another verse. We're just going to skip over that one. This particular song has lots of different verses that lots of people have used over time, and not everyone uses all the same ones. But we're just going to add our special ending next week. But before we do that, before I leave you today, let's do everything that we know so far and do the best that you can, okay? All right, from the very beginning, I wish I was an apple. Let's see if Mrs. Lentz can get the words right at the beginning this time. That would be very helpful. Okay, here we go. I wish I was an apple, hanging on a tree, and every time a Cindy passed, she'd take a bite of me. She told me that she loved me, she called me Sugar Plum, she throwed her arms around me, I thought my time had come. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, I'll marry you sometime. Verse 2. She took me to the parlor, she cooled me with her fan, she said I was the prettiest thing in the shape of mortal man. My Cindy in the springtime, my Cindy in the fall, if I can't have my Cindy, I'll have no gal at all. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, I'll marry you sometime. Here's our new verse. If I were made of sugar and standing in the town, then every time my Cindy passed, I'd shake some sugar down. And if I had a needle as fine as I could sew, I'd sew her to my coattails, and down the road I'd go. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home, Cindy, Cindy, I'll marry you sometime. Okay, nice job, everybody. Hope you've had a fun time working on Cindy. It's one of my favorites, like I told you from before. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And until I see you next week, bye.